Hello, YouTube. It's me. I'm back. I'm going to do one more just off the cuff video, generally talking about our subject. And then I'm going to continue with the creation myth in the next video. But I will touch on the creation myth today. I was hoping to get a bit more momentum by now. We've come up to basically squaring the circle in our creation myth, but today I'm just wanted to touch on the general subject and where it can lead, lines of thought, and also its ancient origins. And unfortunately, you can't help get metaphysical about it, or scientific, or mystical. Some people are inclined to see the mysticism in it. In a way, what we're talking about is the forces in nature, positive, negative, up and down, left and right, forces in time and space, forces within geometry, forces within vectors. We're focusing on the mathematical proportions within the basic shapes. That's our cosmology that we're building in a geometry sense, right? We've started from a point of creation, which is where the compass first meets the paper. First shape you make is the circle, which is the creation. And the thing is, metaphorically, metaphorically, is that the right term? Symbolically, the circle represents our universe, right? All of our other creations that we're going to make are within the first circle that is made. One line of this creation myth, part of the progression in geometry, is to create the whole creation, but then number 2 comes into our creation. That's where you make the second circle, because 2 is abstract. If 1 is whole and it's everything, what is 2? So the creator makes 2 circles, 1 and 2. What symbol represents 2 geometrically is a line from point A to point B. The symbolism of 2 is a straight line, or the converging of 2. And so if 2 circles of equal diameter, you can join those circles, you create the vesica Pisces. And then within that vesica Pisces, you create the first polygon, which is, well, first of all, you create within that fish shape a rhombus. But a rhombus is 2 equilateral triangles. Now, sorry if I've digressed, if it sounds like I'm just repeating myself, please forgive me. But we're going to stay here for a while. The lattice that's created within the vesica Pisces, that fish shape, is a lens. And that's very important. And it can be misinterpreted in a mystical way. You can't help it. Well, you can. It depends where you want to go with it, right? Some people have come up with unifying theories to do with existence. This diagram we're looking at today, I'm not promoting this. It's some guy I found online. Tetryonic theory it is. But So this guy's developed a unifying theory that explains quantum mechanics and everything scientific all folded up in one theory. I'm not promoting that, by the way. It's interesting though. So if you want to go and check it out for yourself, go and I'm not promoting. I've only just touched on. I've seen one video of this guy, but I wanted to just like what he's talking about is interesting. He's got some scientific papers out. He's not got a massive following. I don't think so. I don't know too much about him, but anyway, his theory is interesting. This Tetryonic theory, and it involves the geometry of the equilateral triangle. That is pivotal to it, and that is the case in reality as well, right? Loads of scientific theories involve this geometry, and that is a fact. This geometry is universal. It's to be discovered and explored by anybody, and has given rise to lots of theories. Going right back to Plato, right? It is an engaging subject. No wonder Plato gave it the element of fire. It does light up the imagination. So there's. I want to start on that picture and move through some. Oh, do you know what? Hang on. That's not the picture I wanted to go on to. So where did I want to go? Yeah, so the squared circle. What I wanted to cover, I wanted to touch on the squared circle. The squared circle has lots of geometrical information in it, and it's going to come up time and time again in our subject. I'll touch on it here with this diagram. This is a version of a squared circle. I've touched on the symbolic meaning of the squaring of the circle. Now there is an element to the squaring of the circle that goes way back to ancient temple building. So the study of the Giza pyramid involves the squaring of the circle, right? And that's going to be a big part of our studies going forward. I don't want to start explaining too much about it now, but there is a depth. Well, there's a vast range of knowledge to be gained from studies of the squaring of the circle, and it leads into the proportions and measurements of the Earth and the Moon. The proportions and measurements of the dimensions of the Earth and the Moon can be expressed in the diagram, or one of the diagrams that's common of the it's called the squaring. It's called a squared circle. This particular squared circle, the perimeter of the square is rational, but the and a certain length, right? It's 4 times its width, yeah. But the circle is, because pi is irrational. You can't get you can't make a circle to an exact length. You can only get to a rough approximation, right? Because of pi, it's irrational. I won't go into that too much now, but there's stuff to be understood about pi. I'm going to have to do a few videos about pi. Sorry, but like we missed stuff at school. There's stuff to understand about pi. First thing I'll explain now: pi, known in the Greek language as p, PWE, pi in the English language can be spelt different ways, but it's pronounced pi. What was I going to say about that? Yeah, pi is the we're going to have pi is an irrational number, right? We've worked it out in the modern world to be something, but that number is never gets to a resolution, right? It goes on forever, that number, right? It's 3.1 point something point, something something something. You can go on for billions of digits, right, and never get to. It's got no pattern to it. There's no patterns. It's just an irrational number. The ancients didn't know what we know. Maybe they did, but they had another. The most common one that was used was the 22:7 ratio, right? So if you imagine the width of a circle 7 and the length of the circumference to 22, the Romans used 3 1/3, 3 1/3. So yeah, that's I wanted to just touch on that. The Giza pyramid comes into this study. The angle of the elevations of the pyramids is contained. That 51 point, and here it's 51.85. So there's different slight variations on that 51 point. Sometimes it's 51.51. They're all very close though. They all come up the same geometry, but I'm not using the numbers in this diagram in my studies. I've not checked these numbers on this diagram we're looking at are correct, but what I'm talking about is the squared circle, right? The triangle you can make in that squared circle corresponds to the Giza pyramid architecture. So that's why, and that links onto our study of the proportions of the Earth and the Moon. Plus it links into Vitruvian man as well. So that's the proportions of the human body. And then, what we're at, where we're at the moment in our creation myth is the squaring of the circle, the symbolic meaning in ancient architecture, temple building of, a square, the union of a square and a circle. I've covered that quite a lot now, the circle represents number one. It's the creation, it's our creation. It's the shape that represents the heavens. Square is the shape that represents the earth. It's where the Creator brings order. So the number that represents that shape is number 4. So yeah, I wanted to touch on that today. Another diagram of the square and of the circle. Again, I can't clarify this interpretation of it. I've just pulled this image off. There are lots of lines of inquiry, and it's going to be quite a big part of our investigation. So going back here to our union of 2 circles, right? Number 2 is expressed by 2 circles. We said about the line, a line symbolically representing 2 circles. So just back to our Vesica Pisces, really, and discovering our first ratios in the Vesica Pisces, our first square root ratios that we're using in our creation myth are all contained within the geometry of the Vesica Pisces, otherwise known as a fish vessel. Piscean vessel is another term for it. So I know I'm just want to touch on that again today. Our first 3 proportions in our study at the moment is pi, which is the relationship between the diameter of a circle and its circumference, right? Then the second one is square root 2. Square root 2 is from the square, so its corresponding shape in our study is the square, right? So that ratio from the square and pi are our first 2. Then our third ratio in our creation is expressed in this diagram in the Vesica Pisces fish, and it's the ratio between the width of the fish and then the length of the fish. That's our square root 3 ratio. Square root 3 ratio is represented in our study as well by 2 equilateral triangles. So, you can So yeah, the square root 2 ratios, the equilateral triangle, the jump, you know, that's the shape that represents the square root 3 ratio. So there's our first three ratios that we're pretty much on at the moment, right? In our creation myth. So look, I wanted to just touch on this diagram. We're talking about the canon of proportion, right? So it should be becoming pretty evident to you now. I've mentioned many times geometry is measure of the earth, or earth measure. Our early measuring systems were developed from, you know, proportions of the human body, the cubit, yeah. So the English foot is a derivative of that cubit, and that duodecimal system we know as in the, you know, the foot measurement system will become very apparent, right? It does. So there's ways of looking at the. I've got a delivery coming in a minute. I might have to pause this video. In fact, I'm just going to pause and I'll be back. Right, where were we? Were we on this picture? It doesn't matter. I just had a food delivery. So anyway, right, back to our point, my point today. The union of those two circles is part of our creation myth. The basic 12, the first 12 proportions are vital to our studies now. It's the canon of proportion, or canon of number. So the shapes, the basic shapes, have corresponding numbers, and we're discussing their relationships to geometry. All unfolds from the Vesica Pisces. Our first three ratios can be expressed in different ways, right? And the different shapes have their correspondences to them. I'm a bit off point at the moment because I got distracted. So for the sake of the argument, let's move on from that picture. The first evenly sided shape polygon you create with the Vesica Pisces is the Trinity, right? You can form that in these image known as the segment known as the Vesica Pisces. The Vesica Pisces is a union of two circles of the same size. And I'm really waffling because I've got distracted. Let's just look at pictures. You can progress naturally, you know, in this development of geometry, right? The next shape that becomes apparent in geometry after the triangle naturally is the square. Number that represents a triangle is number 3. There are other numbers that are important to the triangle, like the inner angles. 3 inner angles of an equilateral triangle, 60 degrees each, make 180. Excuse me. I'm really distracted at the moment. I'm going to wrap. Look, we all make mistakes, don't we? This is completely unrehearsed. So 3 inner angles of a triangle, 180 degrees, right? As well, you know, a big part of our study is why is a circle divided into 360 and 12, right? So there's the correspondent to our duodecimal element of our study, the number 12. You can naturally divide a circle into 12 segments, right? that going back through antiquity was, expressed in a way of, expressing the zodiac, the heavens. There's a modern system we now use to measure objects within the solar system, right? And that corresponds to this ancient development of geometry, this earth measure that came from what we're calling our creation myth, right? So I'm trying to explain to you, without sounding mystical, what we're calling in the videos, the creation myth. I'm using the word, the term creation myth. It's just a way of explaining the cosmology, right, that can naturally be developed through the progression of geometry. So, right, I'm getting back on point now. I'm going to talk about this picture further down the line. There's so much symbolism in this picture. This picture is about the subject that we're talking about, right? In lots of in literature, really, what we're commonly referring back to is a golden age. A golden age when the knowledge, it's mythical, probably, that golden age, right? Probably, who knows? No one knows, right? It's metaphoric, right? The golden age. Plato wrote about it in the writings of Atlantis. It's in lots of art, and the expression and imagery of that is in lots of art and literature. There's a biblical way of looking at it. There's Plato has his own discussions about it. We're talking about the Republic, right? Socrates spoke about the Republic. The Republic's about how to build an ideal state in harmony, right, where everyone can flourish. And the folklore is now intertwined with our modern, it is part of the modern story, right? Because the terms we use for it is utopia, right? A return to the golden age. And that's expressed in art and literature in so many ways. That basic storyline, of a new world order. The imagery and symbolic meaning of the new world in America, God's chosen land, the promised land. Another term for it is, a term for it is like, the city on the hill, right? People in the US will have a familiar, should have be aware of that term, right? But like the whole metaphorical, symbolic meaning of the capital on the hill is the vision of Zion, which is God's perfect city descending to earth. And that ties in with, lots of literature and an ancient practice of how to build a perfect society, right? That it's the basis of the Republic, is my point. But we're focused on this symbolism in architecture and in geometry. And this picture speaks volumes of this study of a canon of proportion. The canon of proportion was a system of cosmology worked out of how to build temples in harmony with the universe. Temple is a point where, the heavens merge with the earth, right? The symbolism of a square is the earth. Symbolism of the circle in the arch, in the dome, is of the heavens. And there's our squared circle, right? When the circle is squared, you may have the revelation that John had. Look, I'm not a Christian, by the way. But the imagery of St. John having that vision, a high vision of God. John was probably an initiate from mystery schools. So was Jesus, probably. Anyone in the crafts back in the day, whether you were a carpenter, you know, if you were a carpenter, you were a builder, you knew the craft. So the symbolism of the crafts and the fraternities and of the mystery schools all correspond to our study of what is expressed in architecture, the temple. You know, we've all heard the term of the human body being the temple. Well, the geometry's in the human body, right? Our measurement comes from the human, our measurement systems come from the human body. The cubit, the foot. So the canon of proportion is expressed in the human body. Canon of proportion expressed in the temple buildings, going back into antiquity, the squaring of the circle. Let's move on. We're stuck on a picture. I wonder why it gets stuck like that sometimes. So yeah, let me just move through a few pictures now and wrap this one up. Squaring of the circle, we're going to be covering that in great detail. And the most famous world temple, and world temple is the right word, right? Is the Giza pyramid. The squared circle is, the Giza pyramid is a squared circle. The dimensions of pi, you know, in different numbers. Our canon of proportion is relevant to the squaring of the circle. The thing is, though, we're moving a bit fast for our pay grade at the moment. We're concentrating on our first three proportions, right? And that is the square root 2 proportion. Well, pi, first of all, right? Pi, then the square root 2, then the square root 3 proportion. We're going to be moving into, you know, pentagonal square root 5 geometry very, very soon in our discussions. But it's important to really, you know, I've made a point of really, you know, making a point. I know I keep saying making a point, but there's no other word I can use, of talking about these, you know, first three ratios. There's deep meaning, there's layers of meaning to gain from, you know, revisiting the subject of the square root ratios, what they are about, you know, and that's why I'm on repeat at the moment. Lots of scientific theories involve the geometry, and I don't want to, you know, so I haven't got, it's a way above my pay grade, right, is what I'm saying. But you will find the geometry in science. You can't help get into the realms of like metaphysics and speculation is the best way I can describe this. But we're talking about a symbol that's been used for thousands of years by religions. So there are many, many, many rabbit holes you could get lost on in YouTube. I hope I'm not one of them. Right, I'm trying to get back to the basics, and without, you know, I'm happy to talk about mysticism and metaphysics, speculation, but I'm just trying to like get, no. We're doing a study of the basic proportions 1 to 12. The canon of proportion. That's the whole focus of these videos, and it does lead into the realms of, like I say, metaphysical speculation. I've made this point many times. That fish shape within the Vesica Pisces is a type of lens. So when I got into the subject through architecture, right? The classical architecture is this subject, right? It goes back to temple building. There are different branches and that's the correct term to use, branches of this study that have led into many sciences we use today, right? But the subject used to be one subject back in the day. In the time of the ancient Greeks, basic arithmetic was called logistics, how to get from point A to point B, and how to do basic arithmetics. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of kids just, that's all a lot of kids use. Yeah, I won't say too much about that. But the Gothic arch, right, is a classic depiction of a Vesica Pisces. You can go off and explore the symbolism we're discussing in any church, typically, or temple, whether it's, Muslim temple, whether it's a synagogue, a Jewish temple, whether it's a Buddhist temple, it doesn't matter. All of the symbology heralds back to to what we are discussing. It is the canon of proportion. It's the first 12 numbers, the corresponding shapes, right? That's it in a nutshell. So I wanted to leave it there today. Symbolically, I'll say this. Look, a keystone symbolically is very symbolic. So that, yeah, I just wanted to mention that, really. I don't want to get mystical or sound mystical actually about a keystone, but obviously, as symbolic as a cornerstone is, a keystone is symbolic. That has. So yeah, I wanted to touch on that, right? Fleur-de-lis a play on the Trinity, isn't it? Many symbols in religion are a trinity for a very good reason, right? We're focused on that equilateral triangle matrix, the lattice that's created within the Vesica Pisces. I'm going to term it now to end this video equilateral geometry, or equilateral triangle geometry, right? Have a powerful day. See you on the other side.